Hey everybody, on this sort of first truly cold day of the year here in Fairbanks, I want to give a little explanation about video conferencing to carry on with our discussion on different platforms that we started last week with YouTube. Video conferencing and YouTube sort of represent opposite ends of the spectrum, uh, from broadcasting to interpersonal communication through uh, um, video, I guess. Okay, let's see. All right, so let's start with this idea of the base communication unit again. We've talked about this a number of times really, but it's the idea that we can break up or define communication at a very fine scaled unit of a communicator sending a signal out, uh, something receiving that, and then giving a signal back to the communicator. So there's 1, 2, 3 steps, right? Send out, be received, get back information, that's 3. And then the fourth really final step in that is that the communicator makes change. There's some internal change that happens for the communicator from that feedback, and that change then shapes the next unit of communication that the communicator sends back out. This results in a phenomena called convergence, which you can often see when groups of people that don't know each other get together, like say summer camp. They have all different slang and word use at the start of the summer, but then by the end of the summer, after they've completed a lot of these little base communication units, they'll share the same words for the exact same thing. They'll develop unique slang to their group. That's a function of all the change in the base units happening over and over and over again, so that the two people communicating converge on a shared understanding. That the example of slang is something kind of extreme, but generally speaking, effective communication can be defined as shared understanding of a concept. Doesn't mean shared value judgment of that concept, but shared understanding of the concept. Okay, so that's the base unit of communication. And when we look at all of our platforms and different mediums that we communicate through, we want to look at how those mediums impact that unit of communication. And specifically, we want to look at the rate that that unit is completed. So like, say the speech is that we just did, your first graded speech, that a pretty slow base unit, right? Because you did the speech, you said all that you wanted to say in that speech, then you didn't get any feedback until we met and discussed it, or maybe even just that very little bit of feedback that I wrote, which was intentionally little. I want you to meet and speak with me so that we can do this base unit quickly. And so that was a slow unit. When we're talking in our meetings about the speeches one-on-one using video conference, that's a fast unit. We complete that really quickly, and we have a number of them back and forth. Right, and that's why I prefer those one-on-ones, right, is for that very fact that we can complete the base unit quickly and come to shared understanding faster than the slower forms of text or back and forth videos. Okay, the other thing we want to think about with this idea of interpersonal versus, or interpersonal and broadcast communication on a spectrum is, the rate of the base unit completion, the numbers involved. Typically with broadcast, or traditionally, we assume that with broadcast communication, there's a lot of numbers involved, like the guy on the stage there, right? And then interpersonal usually is fewer numbers. The different mediums that we communicate in, however, change that. That speech that you just did, the first graded speech, kind of a broadcast form in the sense that the base unit was so slow to be completed, but not very many people involved, one person. That's atypical from traditional mediums of communication, radio, television, public speaking with sound systems, etc. So usually those have large audiences for broadcast, but you don't have to. It depends on the medium. And then lastly is spatial concerns. So one of the things that all of our digital media have allowed us to do is mess with the space in which we're communicating. It used to be to have an interpersonal communication that you had to be face to face. Then the phone came along and that extended it a little bit, and now social media has really extended it. All right, so that's kind of the, the principles of communication that we're assessing our different platforms through. Last week was YouTube. This week is video conferencing like Zoom, etc. So let's define video conferencing. Lots of platforms for video conferencing: Zoom, Skype, Google Meet, I guess, WebEx. But what they all have is real-time audio and visual capabilities so that you can get the visual nonverbals of talking face-to-face, and you can have fast, you don't always have, but you can have fast base unit completion because of that real time. They generally also add in the idea that you can have back channel chatting, so a single presenter with people chatting in the background, breakout rooms, shared screens, so you can, you know what shared screens are, and that you can share documents and resources. Well, share resources, usually in the form of documents or images or videos, etc. Okay, so that's sort of what video conferencing is. It differs broadly from YouTube in the sense that it has that real-time component, right? And yeah, real-time audio visual. Though, if you think about some things like YouTube, when you post something and then there's immediate comments, or videos being posted on, well, we'll do Facebook later, so I'll skip out of that. But all right, so with video conferencing, there's new norms or etiquette for communication, just like we have different rules for how we communicate face to face. Like we all sort of know what the expected behavior is in a doctor's office or a classroom or say a party at your friends. They change, right? Across settings. Video conference is another setting really where the rules change. First of all, video conferencing, for the most part now, as it's happening after COVID, is kind of invasive. It's in our homes. So that's a new norm that we're having to accept, that whether we're at the doctor's or the classroom or whatever, those people are coming, into our homes. So that's not really, it's a norm, but it's not really etiquette. The etiquette side is the idea of, muting when you're not talking, showing your video in a meeting when you're there, even if you're not talking, so you look engaged and so the presenter can get nonverbals from you. There are other rules or etiquette that are still kind of being figured out and being used at different times and different places by different people, are back channeling or back chatting, like having a chat going on among different participants while there's also conversation going on in real-time audio and video. That's an interesting thing. Has positives and disadvantages. It could be distracting, but on the other hand, it could build engagement because you can ask your audience to do things. There's a whole bunch of new scheduling norms with video conferencing that have to be just worked out. Like if you're scheduling with people in a class, like send the link to Zoom, as some of you know I struggled with this week, or like doctors' offices, in how they not only do they have to give you information on when and where, they now have to give you tech information on how to use new technology. That's something new that doctors' offices weren't having to do 8 months ago. And then the other thing is we have a far fewer random encounters through video conferencing than we used to have. So that changes things. On the one hand, we're bringing people into our homes more, and on the other hand, we're not having as many casual encounters. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about those random encounters and the channelization of society through all these different digital media. I love this picture, the chance encounter, a Star Trek fan production. This is awesome because when we think about our digital media, what it is doing is it's uh, allowing us to create networks of people we interact with that share cognitive likes and dislikes, right? So they're cognitive networks. We build those networks around ideas. Uh, yeah. Uh, Whereas in the more traditional, old, face-to-face world where we got to go out into the community, we had lots of random encounters, and our networks were built more by place, who you saw when you moved around your community, rather than idea, who you actively sought out on the internet. That has had lots of ramifications in society that we're dealing with daily, and that we don't, that is too big of a topic for this class, really. But it has caused a lot of problems, and this fundamentally comes down to the idea that us as communicators and the mediums that we communicate through are not always working under the same incentives for defining effective communication. You know, to be frank, the platforms we communicate through are generally there as a commercial entity to make money. They do things, they structure communication through their platforms to entice you to interact with that platform more, right? To make money. I mean, that's what they're doing. That's how it works, right? A problem with that, or a ramification of that, is that it interacts with uh, just human social characteristics of where we like to be around people that are like us. Birds of a feather flock together. um, and so if we go on a web page, or not a web page, a social media channel platform, and it's always giving us content that we don't like, we won't go there. And if they give us content that we like, we'll go there. And so they're incentivized to only give us what we like. And that creates groupthink on all, across all value structures. It doesn't matter what value system your worldview has you organized around. If you're only talking to people that share that world system, it gets tighter and tighter and more insular. And that has all kinds of ramifications. Okay, so back to video conferencing, and just recognizing how it forces us into these very idea-oriented networks. There's some things that lead to effective communication in video conferencing. One is the environment, the equipment you have, the setting, and your connectivity. So equipment that controls things like video quality and sound quality at one level. Connectivity also impacts that, right? And then your setting is how you have your sound and video equipment set up so that the impression, really a non-verbal impression it gives on those that you're trying to communicate with through video conferencing. And then the other aspect of that is sort of the mental approach that you use going into the communication. You know, and there's two things there: your attitude, and then your knowledge base. So if you have a high knowledge base and a lousy attitude, you might make things work. If you have a low knowledge base and a great attitude, you might make things work. But if you have a great attitude and a great knowledge base on communicating through a new channel, then definitely it will work. That's basically it. And the article that we have for this week's work talks in more detail about that, but it's not that complicated. If you go into learning something new with a good attitude, you'll have a better chance of learning it and being successful with it. And we have to recognize that post-COVID, most of us are learning video conferencing as a new communication medium. So we're trying to learn whatever content we're learning through that medium. say a new marketing strategy for a business, as well as learning the technology, the communication system itself. So there's a double cognitive load. That's why a lot of us are feeling, or one of the factors that make a lot of us feel so just sort of mentally tired through all of this COVID events has been the changes in systems we have to use to communicate, as well as the unknowns of what's going to actually happen with the disease. Okay, so there's a gazillion different tons of platforms out there, quickly evolving. I've been doing video conferencing a long time. There used to just be a couple, one or two, and they were Polycom or Cisco, and they required the people that wanted to connect, plus a whole nother group of technicians in the middle to make the connection happen. Now we can just do that off our computers at home. And so there's a lot of variety in there. We'll look into a little bit of during the activities this week, but for the most part, they all kind of work the same. And so we'll just dig into whatever ones you're using the most in your weeks. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of video conferencing, super interesting form of communication because of the real-time back and forth and the ability to complete fast base units, but also the addition of adding in, things like screen sharing, exchanging documents, and back channels. So quite a intriguing form of communication to ponder, I guess. So enjoy, and I will talk to you all later.